Through the forest I ran, and I was free. I loved it. The wind whistling past me, the trees flying by on either side, the sound of birds chirping in my ears, the smell of the morning dew filling my nose. There was nothing like it, nothing in the whole world. My family praised me for being so brave to go out on my own without any help so often, and I accepted their praise with my head held high. But in truth, it was not a difficult task for the most part. I just ran, looking for threats and possible food. Sometimes I would hunt the food myself if it was small, like the rabbits. Other times, if it was too large, such as with the deer, I would go back and get help. But mostly, I ran. That is what I loved the most. I returned to my home, where my mate and children perked up upon seeing me. They would often get nervous when I scouted, even when I had been successful many times before. But I knew that it was out of love for me, not out of thinking that I was inept. I loved them deeply as well, so I greeted them all individually upon my return. One mate, 3 children, and me. A family. The children were playing with one another, roughhousing so that they could get big and strong, and one day replace me. Such was the way of things. I asked my mate how things were while I was gone. She told me that it had been fine, but she felt it was going to rain soon. I felt that way as well. It was something in the air, the way the wind blew, the way it smelled. You could just tell. I told her that we should stay in for tonight, that we would go hunting tomorrow, together. The children were old enough that they would be all right if left alone for a couple of hours. She agreed, and gave me a small nuzzle as I curled up beside her. We watched the children play for a little bit longer, but it was getting dark, and I soon told them to get to sleep. They agreed with reluctance, and soon we were all dozing peacefully. I did not have any dreams. The next day, me and my mate left our home. She told the children to stay here and not to wander. They just looked at us with their big, innocent eyes. I huffed in exasperation, but we left anyway. Hopefully they would not do any serious damage to their home or each other while we were gone. My mate questioned her coming along and wondered if she should stay with the little ones, but we needed to hunt for bigger game than normal, as I had not found anything last night. Perhaps a deer would do. So off we ran, and once again I was free. The wind rushing past me, my mate beside me, nothing but the grass beneath my feet and the trees flying by. As we ran, I kept stock of our surroundings, keeping a mental note on where we were. There was the creek, and there was the fallen tree that made a large triangle, and there was the big rock. I knew this area well, as I had lived here for many years. It was actually this area where I had met my mate, and where we had decided to call home. Thus, it was for this reason that I was surprised to find something new and out of place. It was a hole in the ground, circular and fairly large, at least several paces long. I came to a quick stop, as did my mate. We kept our distance, checking out this strange new phenomenon with trepidation. What did it mean? Where did it come from? From this distance I could see nothing strange about it, other than the fact that it now existed. It was just a hole in the ground. I looked at it. I listened to it. I smelled it. I did not want to get any closer, so I did all of this from a distance. There was nothing immediately notable about it. A faint smell of salt came from within, but that meant nothing to me. I went over to it slowly and peered down it while my mate kept watch. There was only darkness. I told my mate this, and she asked if I thought there was possibly any food to hunt in there. I told her I doubted it. I had seen, nor smelled, nor heard anything. So we left. There was no need to continue to do anything here. It was just a pit. As we hunted, we wandered far and wide. After much time, we finally found a deer, a small doe that was all by herself. As we approached quietly, so as to not alert it to our presence, I noticed certain things about it that caused me concern. The deer had its mouth hanging open, with its tongue lolling out as it panted. Its eyes rolled around its skull, looking at nothing and everything, with a sort of thick film over them. Its fur looked strange as well, thick and matted, much more so than the other deer that we had hunted before. There was also a long trail of what seemed to be its intestines dragging behind the creature, coming out of a red hole in its stomach, leaving a thick white liquid on the ground as it walked. The innards were quite long, simply hanging loose and catching on the rocks and twigs that made up the forest floor. Even now I could see various plants and refuse stuck to it. Despite the fact that this was a very grievous wound, the deer did not seem to acknowledge it at all, instead choosing to spend its time running in circles and going nowhere. As we watched, it reared its head back and slammed it against a tree trunk, causing a large, red wound to open on its head and blood to begin spilling onto the ground below. Then the deer simply kept walking in circles, indifferent to the now large amounts of blood it was losing. I bristled at the sight of this, as did my mate. There was clearly something very wrong with this doe. It appeared to be deeply, deeply sick. Being sick was not necessarily a deal-breaker. We ate things that were sick before. But this was far too much to deal with. The strong ate the weak. That was the way of things, and the weak were often sickly. But there was a limit to what was acceptable. It was clear that if we were to kill this deer and eat it, the meat would be rancid, and almost certainly unfit for consumption. My mate turned and looked at me, and I could see in her gaze that she was still considering taking it down for ourselves. However, I simply would not allow it. We were not yet that desperate to resort to eating such a terrible-looking creature. I signaled to her this, and so we continued onward, leaving the sick deer at the mercy of whatever strange ailment ravaged its body. Thankfully, we were able to find a pair of healthy rabbits fairly shortly afterwards. And with some quick yet stealthy movements and a flash of our fangs, the rabbits were ours. As we carried them back home, I could not rid myself of the image of that strange deer from my mind. I had never seen a sickness like that, and it disturbed me. What if my mate or one of my children got it? They would most certainly end up dying from it, and on top of that, I would have to exile them for sure, which did not appeal to me. The risk of them spreading the sickness was simply too high to risk everyone else's safety. I did not even want to think about what would happen if I were the one to get that sickness. I did not know if my family would be able to continue on without me. Our group was smaller than most, and with so many young children it would be difficult for my mate to continue on. This is why all of them often got so nervous when I went out on my own, but I was not worried about that for much longer. Soon, the little ones would be big enough to join us on our hunts, and we would be able to move as a pack, much stronger than one or even two. Still, I had my concerns. When I began to teach the children how to hunt, I would need to stress upon them the importance of making sure that the food they were eating was fit for consumption. But that was something to worry about for another day. For now, we had just gotten home, and the children were running out to meet us. They nipped excitedly at the meat, and I had to gently prod them back into the den before giving them their food, as it was starting to get dark out. I laid down near the back, content to gnaw on the lower half of the second rabbit while my mate got the other half. The children fought among themselves for the other rabbit, knocking each other around and growling. I let this go on for probably too long, and was about to tell them to knock it off when my mate beat me to it, barking at them to settle down. She came over and curled up next to me, having eaten her fill. I gave her a kiss to say thank you, to which she responded with only a sigh. Children can be difficult. As I laid there, my family curled up around me. I thought of the deer I had seen earlier. I thought of that strange hole in the ground as well. I had lived in these woods a long time, and I had never seen anything like those things before, and now for both of them to happen on the same day? I was not one to normally worry about these sort of things. I prided myself on being able to take the world in stride, but this was very unusual. And yet, what was there to do about it? Nothing, so I put it out of my mind. I would simply have to avoid anything that looked as though it had what the deer had, and me and my family would be perfectly fine. I was not concerned about the pit. It was a pit, it wasn't going to do anything. And with that, I shut my eyes and went to sleep, surrounded by warmth, even on this cold night. The next day, a storm passed overhead once again, signaling that we were truly in the rainy season. 2 rainfalls in 3 days was not insignificant and was making hunting difficult. Nobody liked getting wet when they didn't have to, myself included, so we once again passed the day in our shelter. It was a quiet day of not doing much at all. I always found the sound of rain to be peaceful, and it kept me lulled into a half-asleep state. I knew that outside it was cold and wet, but here, in my home, it was warm and dry. We passed the time mostly napping, with only the occasional interruption of the children making a ruckus as they messed about. I did not think about deers or pits in the ground. I had better things to do, such as sleeping. The sun rising in the sky awoke me in tandem with my stomach growling, reminding me that I had not eaten yesterday. I yawned and stretched, getting ready to head out and begin looking for food. A noise from my mate made me turn around and look back, however. She looked at me expectantly, then down at the kids. They looked between the two of us with wide eyes, not understanding. I sighed. They would have to learn how to hunt sometime. Now was as good of a day as any, I suppose. I grunted, and they ran over to me excitedly, dodging between my legs while chasing one another and generally being a nuisance. I turned to look at my other half, but she had already turned away and was now laying back down on the ground to sleep. I huffed at her, to which she did not respond. Guess I was doing this alone. We walked through the forest, the leaves still glistening from the rainfall. The ground was muddy, so we left prints on the earth wherever we went. I sniffed the air, seeing if I could find anything worth hunting, but I only smelled rainwater. However, it was not in vain. I looked back and saw the small ones copying my movement, putting their noses first high in the sky, then low to the ground. They didn't understand the reason behind the motions, not yet, but they had taken the first steps. I was pleased. Perhaps this was going to be easier than I thought. Then one of them tripped on their own tail, falling face first into the mud, squealing. Perhaps not. I picked him up by the scruff of his neck and kept walking. As we walked, I made sure to keep an eye on the kids while also attempting to see if I could find anything worth tracking, a difficult task. With my attention so split, I almost didn't notice what we were approaching until we were right up to it, with the smell of salt making its way to my nose in a sudden burst. It was the pit that me and my mate had run into the other day. I wrinkled my nose at it. The smell of salt was overpowering. My children peeked around me to get a view of what I was looking at, but as I turned away to go somewhere more pleasant, they followed in my footsteps. We were only several paces away, however, when the sound of tumbling rocks from the pit made me quickly turn around. At first there was nothing. A silence overtook the forest. The birds stopped singing, the wind stopped blowing, and it even felt as though the dripping of the raindrops from last night's storm froze in place. Then, slowly, a limb emerged from the pit. Red and deformed and ugly, it had 4 short appendages like toes attached to the end of it. It was slimy and raw, as though it was a newborn coming out of its mother's womb. A second limb followed shortly after, just as disgusting as the first. The 2 of them grasped around the edge of the pit, clawing at the dirt and twigs and plants, trying to find something to hold on to. Finally, it found a tree root that it managed to awkwardly wedge its left limb in, grabbing the top of the root with the other limb. With this leverage, it was able to drag the rest of itself out of the hole, exposing its body to the morning sunlight. The body was even worse than the limbs. It walked on 4 legs, like myself, but they were wet and gooey and veiny, pulsating every couple of seconds. The main body was hairless and smooth, colored a deep red and covered in a transparent film that glistened in the sunlight. There appeared to be small, hard objects that were randomly scattered around its entire shape, that I realized upon closer inspection were actually teeth. Small little teeth everywhere, on the legs and face and back. The head, which also had random teeth strewn about it. appeared to be similar to my own, with a long snout and two short ears that came out of the top of its head. That was about where the similarities ended, however. The mouth on the strange creature was far too large for its face. If it were to open it all the way, the head would almost split in two from how far back it went, and it had no nose. There was only one large, yellowish eye that rested in the middle of its head, that was constantly peering around itself in seeming confusion, never focusing on one thing for too long. If it noticed me and my children, it did not acknowledge us. Where a tail ostensibly should have been, there was instead a thick tube of meat, stretching off of the creature and into the pit from which it had emerged. It was seemingly made of the same type of flesh as the creature itself, and pulsated along it in rhythm with the body. In addition to this, every now and then a large bulge would emerge from the beast and head down the tube, back into the pit. Overall, it was about the same size as myself, and had the same basic build, but that was where the similarities ended. This thing looked like a mockery of me and my kind. A poor attempt at a copy from a creator that only understood the bare minimum of what it was trying to make. I positioned myself between the thing and my children, assuming a defensive stance. A low growl emanated from me as I warned it to stay away. It didn't even seem to notice me, however, instead turning back to the pit it emerged from and opening its mouth to let out a long, guttural howl. For a moment, nothing happened, and I took this opportunity to back up a few paces away from the creature, never taking my eyes off of it. I spared a moment to glance down at my children, who were shivering in fear. I needed to remain strong and confident for them, as if they panicked, I wouldn't be able to keep track of all of them at once. This is why I remained slow and steady with my movements. However, before we were able to make any real distance from the creature, two more similar-looking beasts emerged, both of them as slimy and pink as the first, both trailing the long, umbilical cord-looking tube back into the pit. They grunted and yelped at one another, seeming to communicate. I took advantage of this distraction to turn and start pushing the children away, trying to make distance from whatever this thing was. I did not understand, or want to understand what was happening here. All I wanted was for me and my babies to be far away from here. Once again, though, before we had taken more than a couple of steps, the creatures quickly moved to intercept us, stumbling and tripping over the roots and debris of the forest floor, but still moving surprisingly fast. Before I had any real time to react, they had us surrounded, drooling and staring at us with their cyclopean eyes. I got low and growled again, flattening my ears. They circled us, dragging their long, tail-like appendages with them as they still led into the depths of the pit. The leaves crunched under my feet as a wind blew through, rustling the trees around us. They left trails of slimy substance behind them as they slowly walked, which glistened dully in the bright sunlight. Somewhere, a bird cried. I reared my head back and howled, the noise piercing through the air. Following my lead, the children did the same, adding their voices to my call. We held like that for a long moment, before petering off, the sound echoing through the forest. A beat of silence passed once again as the creatures paused in their circling, curious about what we were doing. However, after the moment passed and nothing happened, they began to make strange, guttural noises, thick with liquid and phlegm at the effort, causing liquid to pour from their mouths. The noises eventually turned into something similar to our howls, but much lower and with voice breaks, the octaves of the calls raising and lowering seemingly randomly. And unlike us, something answered their call. It, like them, emerged from the pit. It rose, pink and fleshy, as hairless as the three creatures. It walked on two spindly legs and stood perhaps twice the height of myself. Two arms emerged from the top half of it on either side, and at the top of the body sat a head, with the same huge, gaping mouth and single yellow eye. I saw now that the tubes that came from the creatures circling myself and my children led back to this thing, going into its stomach, which was fat and bloated, with the skin so tight it seemed like it might rip open at any moment. Two large, sagging breasts hung from its chest, dripping a stinking, off-white, viscous fluid that ran slowly down its entire body onto the ground below it. From its back emerged yet another fleshy cord that once again led back into the hole it had emerged from, perhaps connecting to something even bigger and more grotesque than this thing standing before me. It ran its eye around everywhere, gibbering and panting like the others, taking in the surroundings around it. However, unlike the others, it quickly focused in on us, a glimmer of intelligence flickering in its single eye. It simpered and grunted, seeming to give instructions to the creatures it was attached to. They obeyed, moving in closer despite me growling and snapping at them with my sharp teeth. The head creature approached too, walking on unsteady, thin legs as its fat upper torso waved forward and back. With 4 of them now, the smell was overwhelming, a thick putrid scent permeating the air that was making it difficult to breathe. One of the creatures got only a hair's breadth away from me, biting at my side. I dodged backwards, taking the opportunity to strike myself as my children cowered underneath my legs. I darted forward and bit into the creature's pink, rubbery flesh, sinking my teeth into its slimy, stinking hide. Thick, dark blood ran from the wound as I tore into it, attempting to inflict as much damage as possible. The taste was horrible, like rotting meat and disease. The creature retreated quickly, whimpering, and I quickly spat out the hunk of flesh I had ripped off, where it laid on the ground and continued to pour out what seemed to be far too much blood for its size. The hurt beast retreated to the leader, whimpering from its wound. It leaned on to the larger creature, begging for help as the rest of us watched. Slowly, clearly not used to this sort of motion, it knelt down, holding its companion in its arms as it made soft cooing noises to it. It stroked it for a short moment, before laying it down onto the ground, letting it rest. It clumsily gathered up some mud off the ground, pushing it onto the wound in an attempt to stop the bleeding as it whispered softly, its eye never leaving its companion. It grasped the creature's mouth and brought it to its strange bosom, attempting to feed it the thick liquid that still ran from them, but struggling due to the shape of the mouth and its general clumsiness. It was disgusting, yes, but at the same time, I glanced down at my own children, who I had been standing over protectively this whole time. I understood the creature's feelings, yes, but I did not sympathize with it. It had started this fight. As if it had heard that very thought, it stood back up, letting its companion stay down. Finally looking back at me, it roared through thick saliva, rallying the others to moving closer to us. This time it advanced as well, picking up a large rock off the ground with a wet smack, as it pried it from the mud and fluids that they had been leaving everywhere. It swung it around haphazardly, nearly hitting itself several times but holding significant force behind each swing. All 3 of them advanced, and I knew that this time a simple bite would not be enough to stop all of them. They wanted revenge. My children cried in fear, but I stood strong over them, ready to fight to the last breath. Thankfully, however, that moment never came, as right as the beasts were about to attack as one, a howl announced the arrival of help. A flash of gray streaked out from behind a nearby tree and slammed into the leader, knocking it to the ground with a heavy thud. Panting heavily from the run, she howled, and I howled back, greeting her. We wasted not a second, making a break for the new opening in the circle. The knocked-over leader screamed, its jaw stretching back so far that it was at nearly a 180-degree angle, calling for the others to attack us. We sprinted, avoiding the creatures attempting to bite us or knock us over. One of the children was lagging behind, stumbling and falling, so I made the snap decision to turn around and grab them in my mouth, holding them as gently as I could by the scruff of their neck while I whirled back around to run for safety. This decision cost me, however, as one of the creatures took advantage of me slowing down to bite me on my leg. I cried out in pain, nearly dropping my child, but managed to hold on. I struggled to pull myself free, but it was too strong, biting down with exceptional force. I yelped, but thankfully, before things could get any worse, the other children returned, attacking the creature and forcing it to let go as they bit into its underbelly. And then we were off again, sprinting for the trees as they gave chase. I was struggling with the extra weight already, though, and now, with an injured leg, I was moving noticeably slower. Still, I persevered, running as fast as I could while hearing the creatures gaining on me from behind, making their odd gibbering noises. I spared a glance back and saw one right on my heels as it leapt into the air to jump on me. However, it was suddenly yanked backwards, and I could see that it had reached the full extent of the tube that connected it to the tall creature, who had just now managed to stand up. The momentum of the jump sent it falling over again, as it also brought the pursuer to a dead stop midair, crashing them to the ground. And then we were gone, deep into the tree line as the creature screamed behind us, in pain or fury or maybe both. And I heard the tall one, the one who seemed so much like a mother to the others, wailing like a baby's cry.